Hey, deserving listeners, a lot of you have been sending me clips of interviews and whatnot to watch and react to. Let's watch. It pertains to Love is Blind Season 3. Let's watch.
I was like she wasn't treating me like she was ready to marry me, but she was telling me that she was ready to marry me. That's when I put all the cards out on the table and I just really started asking like hard questions and trying to figure out where we were at. But in Malibu, I was kind of oblivious because I was being myself. Like that beach scene where
It's interesting. So it sounds like, and who knows, but I keep having these conspiracy theories about what was really going on behind the scenes with the cast members, with the production team. But according to his narrative, which I could see happening, that he falls in love in the pods, he gets engaged, and he's all in, and immediately starts to experience some issues with Senna, but he's still all in. And you can imagine someone with his background in his religion, when they commit to marriage, there's not a lot of ambiguity there. There's not a lot of questions. Just like, well, I committed, I'm in love. And he could have even thought that God wanted him to marry Zenab since he felt the holy, this is the way not everyone thinks, but they will, that the emotions I'm feeling right now are because the Holy Spirit or God put them here for me to move forward with this. So to go against this would be to go against God. I don't know, but there's a possibility, because to me, when I see the two of them on that very first day, I would imagine a lot of people, not everyone, would have some pretty major concerns. Because I imagine for a lot of them, the individual that they fall in love with is really two different people. There's the person that they fell in love with in the pod, and then when they meet in person, it's a completely new person. It's a 3D person where you're interacting in the world. There's more opportunity for conflicts. Obviously, the physical nature and the chemistry nature and the sexual nature. So you can imagine that it would be two different people, and you'd have to fall in love twice. You'd have to fall in love in the pods, and then you'd have to solidify or fall in love maybe even all over again once you're out of the pods. I don't know. It's just a way that I imagine for a lot of people. And then for those people who fall in love both times, then they end up working out. So you can imagine for Cole and Zenab that first day, there would be some major questions. So because to me, I'm like, when was that moment where one or both of them decided that they didn't want to get married? It surely was not at the altar. I'm just going to put that. Actually, my wife told me that someone told her online or a comment or something that on Love is Blind Japan, that they allow, the production teams allow people to call off their relationship prior to the altar, which I find to really enhance the show. A lot of people want me to react to that. It's on the list. There's a lot of things on the list. Couple therapy, for example. People want me to do sister wives, and there's just a lot of things on the list. And I'm trying to get my life back a little bit, and so I'm trying to limit what I am doing at work all the time. I love what I do, but and really, if I had my way, I would watch all these shows, but because I enjoy it. I enjoy, I don't know, it's an interesting thought experiment. It's entertaining. But in order for me to get anything done in my life and to have time to sleep, I need to be more disciplined around that. And so part of that is actually drawing some boundaries around my work situation. But anyway, so for Cole, you could imagine, what he's saying is that he was pretty much all in until that dinner scene, which I know I didn't react to. I didn't publish my reaction. I reacted internally or maybe even verbally when I was watching, but I don't know, I watched a lot of stuff, but when I don't include things, it's either because I didn't say anything that was that interesting, or during the scene. I think during the scene, I thought, well, there's not really anything new that I'm going to say here. Because part of my whole premise, and I know I'm being boring right now, is to not be boring. I don't want to be boring. So a lot of what I react to, I just discard. I edit it completely out. I don't just watch these things and just react and then publish it. Like, I want it to be concise. And when I see stuff where I'm like, well, I could say, or I find myself saying the same thing, then I just cut it out, or I don't say anything at all. So I know a lot of people were upset at me, and I apologize. Sometimes I don't read the room, and I didn't read the room in that instance. Apparently, people wanted me to at least acknowledge it or say something, and I apologize. Anyway, so it sounds like for him, he, at that moment, during that scene where he felt mistreated was when he was really thinking, well, wait, what's going on? But it's interesting the way he frames it. He doesn't frame it as, and who knows the truthfulness of this, but I don't know, he comes across as pretty genuine. He didn't frame it as, I was questioning whether I wanted to marry her. What he's saying, and has been saying, I think, throughout, is I started to question if she actually wanted to marry me. I want to marry her, but does she really want to marry me? So that's what he's saying. And then I suspect at some point she also decided prior to that or after that that she also didn't want to marry him. And they either had a conference about that in front of the producers or away from the producers, and had decided well before and knew that they were both going to say no, or highly suspected. And then when the producers asked them and worked out who was going to be asked first to commit at the altar, the producers figured out that it would play better or be more dramatic if Zeneb went first. And so then we never actually heard what Cole would have said. It sounds like that's the story.
I said the thing about eating a chocolate or something. I don't remember what I said, but where I said, like, I used some phrase and said, like, she's Alfred if I wanted chocolate, and I said no, and she said, oh, you're okay if I fatten myself up. Like, I did not know how like that looked now that they played it. Like those things, she never brought that up to me either. Like, the show ended up airing that.
Okay, interesting. I wonder if this is one of the things he was crying about during the reunion, where he was saying, I said those things. I can't believe I said those things. I don't know if that's what he's referring to, but he is acknowledging that, yeah, I did say those things, and I do recognize that it doesn't come across very... This is when they're at the beach, I believe, right? And if you watch that scene, you can understand how Zeneb would receive it that way, where she would receive it as like, are you saying something about my weight? But the way that she ran with it seemed exaggeratory. It seemed that way. Anyway, so he's saying that he could see how that innocent, jokey comment was maybe not very sensitive, but he wasn't aware of it. But I think the most interesting thing he said was that she never brought it up with me. She never told me. That is interesting because according to her, she had... Now, who knows what the truth is, right? But according to his story, she never said anything. That doesn't completely let him off the hook in terms of having some ability to know what someone might be sensitive about, because he was saying he wasn't really attracted to, or wasn't attracted to her enough. He was saying he was attracted to her, but not as much as Colleen, right? It doesn't take a genius to know, if you're in Cole's position, that would do a number on her self-esteem about her body, her attractiveness, this kind of thing. And to make innocent jokes, you'd think you would not do that along those lines. You'd be careful along those lines. But I think a lot of people consider him... I think someone was saying that he comes across like a golden retriever or something. This is like eager, bumbling, happy person, oblivious person. And so, who knows? Maybe he's more Machiavellian than that. I don't know. But he's saying that she never told him. And I think that is an important detail, because I think she says she has, so who knows? But if she did tell him, look, those things you keep saying, because according to her, he was saying them all the time. The times that we saw were just some. And it's possible that Cole is, I think, going to say, I didn't say those things away from the camera. But we know that he's not the best rememberer of situations, right? Like he said when during the reunion, when Zeneb said, you said, are you going to have those 2 oranges? Da, da, da. And she said verbatim what he said. She painted it as if he was purposely body shaming her, but it didn't look that way to the majority of viewers. Cole said, I never said that, but he did say that. He just didn't say it along those lines, the way she was painting it. So who knows? Maybe he said a lot of things along those lines and just didn't register what he was saying. I've also hypothesized that he might actually have an issue with body and weight and women, or with Zeneb particularly, I don't know. And subconsciously, he was saying those kinds of jokes as a way of trying to say something. Often our humor is a way for us to subconsciously or even consciously say things passively that we want to say otherwise, but feel like we can't. So who knows? But he's saying that she never said anything. And because if she hadn't ever said anything to him, then that does kind of let him off the hook a little bit, right? But if she had said something and he kept doing it, I think that also says something. I don't know. What do you think?
But it was like, at the time, I didn't think much of it. Even like the part in Malibu where she wouldn't get in the pool because like she didn't want to get her hair wet. Like I didn't register that and think like, oh, I don't like her because she won't get in the pool or something. Like to me, I was still very much so in love, and I thought I was just going through this process. And even talking with Colleen and even all of that, it was like in the moment, it's hard to explain because like no one was there, but like if you were there, it was just part of the experience. Like we were being asked about the other girls, you know, like we were just like, that was, it's
right.
not,
You get prompted like, oh, like,
Yeah, I don't think I included this, but he said he had never heard of Love is Blind when they recruited him for the show. They reached out to him on Instagram. He said that he wasn't on social media very much, and then I think when around the time that he was getting divorced, he went on social media again, maybe to start dating or something, and he said he didn't really have a lot of experience with it, maybe because of religion, I don't know. And then right away, the show reached out to him to recruit him, and then they said Love is Blind. He's like, I don't know what that is. He ended up watching season 1 and actually really liking it, and thought, yeah, that'd be fun. That's a way to meet someone because he was saying in this interview the things he was saying on the show, which was that he had some relationships dating-wise that didn't really work out because he would go with his physical attraction to someone and then find out later that they didn't really have anything in common and they couldn't have in-depth relationships. They couldn't have in-depth conversations. You know, the other thing I'll say is that a lot of the things that he is saying and a lot of his behavior points towards someone who is fairly honest. I think sometimes he's distorted himself, like when he just didn't remember or didn't code the memory as him body shaming when he was saying the thing about the cuties, the oranges. But there's a lot of indications that would have us, or me, I'll just say for myself, trust him a little bit more. Now, I know enough to know that it's impossible to know if someone's lying or not, and there's a lot of nuances to self-deception and trying to paint yourself in a particular light when you're on in the public eye. But the things that he did, like on the show, where he would just blurt out these things like, I don't do nurses. And also when he tells Zeneb how attracted he is to Colleen, right? I remember hypothesizing this at the time, that he seems like the sort of person that has a hard time editing himself. And so I wonder if that translates and generalizes to his personality, and that quality that he has also applies to when he's being interviewed and these kinds of things. Whereas Zeneb, there's some evidence that she's not a liar or some sort of Machiavellian person, but I think she's more average in that she has a greater ability to contemplate or consider how she's coming across and what to say in certain moments, right? Because it seemed as though, who knows, that at some point, Zeneb decided she didn't want to be with Cole and thought, well, the producers are telling me I have to wait until we're at the altar. So what do I say such that, at least to the audience, it plays well? You know, another factor I hadn't thought about was that she undoubtedly, or I don't know undoubtedly, but in all likelihood, she talked with her family and friends a lot about her relationship with Cole, right? And had probably told them that at least she was considering not marrying him, maybe even telling them directly, right? That she wasn't planning on saying yes at the altar. And they would talk a lot, probably. I mean, she talked with the other cast members, we heard that, and gave her perspective, like he said this, and he, in the way that she talked about it. And we imagine it was even more exaggerated potentially when she's talking with her friends, because it was fresher and it's not in front of the camera. Who knows? And her friends and family and the other cast members who are friends of hers are of this narrative. They're very convinced, because it does sound convincing. When you just hear Zeneb's side of the story, you're like, whoa, really? Wow, that sounds awful. When you see the video, when you hear Cole's side, you're like, oh, I think it's a little, there's just some of that, but not all of that. And so I wonder if for Zeneb, she goes up at the altar and she's like, well, I kind of created a monster here. Meaning that me telling everyone this narrative and them supporting me around this, which is nice, I now have to do something against Cole. Otherwise, it would be bizarre for me to just be like, I'm sorry, Cole, I love you so much, I'm just going to say no, and to have us be friends. Like that's not congruent with the narrative that I created. Now, I think another part of it is that she legitimately felt justified in treating him that way, because I think she was very, very hurt as a result, I think, of her schemas and relational traumas that she's still recovering from, which would make sense. Anyway, so I wonder about that. I'm just speaking off the top of my head now. Let's get back to the interview.
The thing that you did was tell Zenab that, which like you don't do that to a girl. Like that's an ego bruise. That moment when you're like,
Absolutely.
oh, this girl. Yeah. So how were you drunk? Like how did that come out?
I mean, it's hard. I'm not gonna. There's things I know I shouldn't say. I mean, no, I wasn't drunk, but it's just a part of the You get teed up to say a lot of things.
Right. I was almost certain what he meant when he paused there, and then he basically just said it, teed up, meaning that the producers encouraged him, maybe even knowing that he was intoxicated, that to do that, to tell Zenab about his feelings about Colleen. I didn't comment on that earlier, but he was talking about how the producers will ask certain questions like, I don't know exactly what happened there, but I've heard reports I've talked to cast members, many cast members on these shows, and sometimes they'll tell me off the record what actually happens from their perspective, of course. Who knows about this show? Who knows about these scenes? I'm sure it's really quite chaotic. There's a lot of producers, there's a lot of cast members, a lot of days of filming, so I'm guessing it's pretty complicated. But from my understanding, a lot of the time, the sort of format of how to produce a reality TV show is to get as much footage as possible, and sometimes you have to engineer it or you have to ask certain questions. And they might do it repeatedly. So they might ask Cole a lot of questions at first that are more innocuous, like, how do you feel about Zenab? Or how was the pool parties? More easier questions for him to answer. And then they just, as he starts to get into the interview, they start asking him about, what are your feelings about Colleen? How do you feel about, because the producers know, oh, we need to find some drama here. And then he starts to say something. And then if you know anything about human behavior and influence, one, when you're intoxicated, that's a thing. But also, it's akin to when people, when investigators, police officers will get false confessions from people. There's a way of asking questions, or when interviewers will get children to falsely accuse adults of sexually abusing them. There's a lot of cases like that where you ask a certain question. I'll talk about the children because I haven't talked about that in a while. It's well documented that this particularly happened more in the past. We've learned from our mistakes as a field in mental health and assessment, not entirely, but hopefully. Teal Swan, I think, might have got. Anyway, point is that there's a way of asking a 3-year-old, like, you ask questions, you suspect as an interviewer that you think the 3-year-old has been sexually abused at a daycare, for example. A famous case of this happened in California in the 80s and 90s. I can't remember what it was called, but just Google it. The case went on for 10 years or something, and it was all part of the satanic panic, and it influences QAnon, and it's a whole thing anyway. And I remember being alive at that time that there were just these ideas in the air that there were satanic sexual rituals around children, and anyway, so. You ask so you believe as an interviewer, you're pretty sure. You might tell people that you're willing to hear whatever story the 3-year-old has to say, but in the back of your mind, you have an agenda. And so you ask certain questions along those agenda lines, and you would say something like, did anyone ever touch you? To the 3-year-old. And the 3-year-old doesn't really know what the landscape is. They don't know what you're getting at because they're 3. And so they might go like, well, yeah. And because touching, happens sometimes, like, holding someone's hand or mussing up someone's hair or something, right? Or whatever, or you bump into someone. It's like, yeah, I touched someone. Oh, so you did touch someone. Where did you get touched? And every time you ask a question, if the answer from the child doesn't go in the direction that your agenda is trying to get at, you exhibit a disappointment or a subtle rejection. The child, let's say that first question, you ask the 3-year-old, did you ever touch anyone? Did anyone ever touch you? And the 3-year-old says, no, because the 3-year-old is, 3-year-old's memory isn't very great. So, and their ability to narrativize reality isn't very great. 3-year-olds are in between a zone where imagination and their own random ideas become reality. It's just part of that age. But so you ask the child, did anyone ever touch you? And the child's like, no. And you as an interviewer are thinking, well, surely someone touched the kid, right? And I think someone really touched the kid a lot. And the kid's probably just afraid. So you ask again, you might say, well, so are you sure that no one ever touched you? So when I ask that second question, emotionally, the child picks up on a vibe, a desire from the interviewer that I answer, that the child is like, I think they want me to say yes to this question. I don't know why. And then so the child says yes. I won't go into graphic detail, but if you do that all along the way over the span of 5 hours and you get more and more specific and more graphic and more accusatory of the daycare, you can have a child telling you whatever you want them to tell you. And you never said to the child, I need you to make something up, or you never overtly pressure the child. It's all these subtle ways. So when they're working with these individuals, and I'm guessing Cole was kind of a perfect person to have on the show because he's a bubbly, somewhat honest person and fun-loving and extroverted. But I don't know how well, and really even if you watch reality TV shows, it's not like you would understand these tactics. Most people think like, well, I wouldn't succumb to that. I don't give in to influence like that. Everyone will succumb to this. Everyone does. Everyone succumbs to social pressure, particularly when they isolate you and da-da-da. And there's probably a carrot and a stick that's being used of, if you don't do what we want to, and there could be a subtle communication that we will destroy you in the edit, or we will glorify you in the edit, or there could be money involved, or who knows. I mean, there's just got to be incentives that are worked in, because of course the producers would engineer that, because that's what works in these scenarios, because the producers are experienced and the cast members sometimes are not. I don't think Cole was at all. So they were probably doing these things to him and saying, asking questions in a certain way, and then getting him to agree or to feel like, I think this is what they want from me. They want me to bring up with Zeneb my attraction to Colleen. Okay. And sometimes they'll even stop the production and turn off the cameras or whatever and go to the Coles of the situation and go, okay, Cole, I need you to be a little bit more explicit about what we talked earlier. That's what we're looking for in the scene. They do that. Make no doubt I don't know if they do it on this show, but they do it on other shows. And then they say, by the way, if you tell anyone about this conversation or this style that we have right now, we will destroy you legally because you signed a contract. So I'm guessing that's what he's talking about right now. Something along those lines, some kind of influence where they convinced him that he should, or it would be in his best interest or something, to yammer about how attracted he was to Colleen. Because remember that scene when it was that just after the pool party situation, and he just kept talking about it, and you just think like, now it does kind of fit his personality. It's not like he didn't say those things. And that's another part of this, is that I'm guessing that the producers tried to influence a lot of the cast members to do all sorts of things. But if it doesn't fit within your personality to do such a thing, then there's no amount of influence that will get you to do that, right? So I think his personality was such that made it available to him, but he wouldn't have done that normally unless he was influenced. Let's rewatch this.
And when you're like,
Absolutely.
oh, this girl. Yeah. So how were you drunk? Like how did that come out?
I mean, it's hard. I'm not gonna. There's things I know I shouldn't say. I mean, no, I wasn't drunk, but it's just a part of the process. You get teed up to say a lot of things you wouldn't.
Do you hear that? Now, I'm reading into it. He did not say all that I just said, obviously, but that's what I hear. What do you hear? Something different?
Zeneb, and she's not as hot. Like
Colleen is not the girl of my dreams. I don't think Colleen is that hot. I think a lot of that's blown out of proportion. I think I said what I said in the pool, and then it got dragged way farther than it should have.
Yeah.
But
you regret saying it to Zeneb, like, and hurting her feelings.
Are you talking about whenever like the whole rating thing happened? I totally regret the rating thing, but I just still am like, why the hell were you asking me to rate girls? Like,
Mm.
who wins? Like,
And that also could have been influenced by the producers. Again, it's not like Zeneb did something that was completely outside of the realm of possibility regarding her personality and her needs or her wants, but that could have also been something that they got her to do. But that's interesting, the way that he framed it. He says, I think he said something like, I didn't think that Colleen was that hot, and the things that I said were blown way out of proportion on the show. If that's true, and who knows, maybe what really happened was, okay, and I think I've said this kind of before, but very briefly, is that he emerges out of the pods and he's very much in love with Zeneb and very much wants to be with her. And they are awkward around each other because they're seeing each other for the first time. A lot of the couples are like that when they first see each other. Not all of them, but many of them. And then that first morning, she starts to become hostile with him. If you watch that scene when she's putting on makeup in the bathroom, I mean, she's being fairly passively hostile, right? Fairly in a very quiet way, being very dismissive of him. And there's that scene where he's standing behind her while she's putting makeup on, and he's like, so what do I do here? And she's like, and he's confused. Now, who knows, maybe he was a jerk face that morning. We didn't get to see that, but we could imagine that he wasn't that bad, but who knows? And so he starts to not only get some question marks regarding their compatibility and how she makes him feel, but also didn't really feel chemistry with her for whatever reason. Whether it was something about the way Zeneb is physically or just the vibe or something, chemistry-wise, who knows? But he starts to say, well, we really fell in love in the pods, but in person, I don't know, I'm just not really feeling it. And then he sees Colleen and he's just like, well, maybe I would have those feelings for Colleen. I mean, she was someone that I did connect with in the pods. So that does raise that question, did I make a mistake? It makes sense. And then when they ask him questions and when they edit it, it was all about Colleen, when the broader picture was he was just having some questions about his attraction or his compatibility with Zeneb more, and the Colleen thing was more of an asterisk. I wonder if that's what we're hearing. All right, well, let's end it there. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.